The midterm elections are here, and the results may determine the future of democracy. Ignore the mainstream media with their shallow coverage of the horse race. They are acting like this is a regular election. But this is no regular election. This is not politics as usual. In fact, this is very unusual politics, where we're fighting for the future of our democracy. The Republicans represent an existential threat to America, and only by voting for Democrats can you change the trajectory of history. You've all seen the ads. The Republicans are promising a lot of things, but don't believe their propaganda. Here are 10 reasons why you should vote for the Democratic Party on Tuesday, November 8th. Number 10, Democrats believe in science. Republicans don't believe in science. That's why they botched our response to COVID-19. Led by their dear leader, Donald Trump, Republicans fought wearing masks, even though they save lives. They tried to keep churches open, even though they are a vector for spreading the virus. Republicans pushed unproven drugs like ivermectin and hydrochloroquine. The result, more than 1 million Americans have died from COVID. For the past 6 months, the United States averaged 300 to 500 COVID deaths daily. People think it's over. It's not. A June study published in Health Affairs found that counties with a Republican majority had a greater share of COVID deaths through October 2021 relative to majority Democratic counties. Listening to Donald Trump and the Republican Party can be hazardous to your health. If you care about science and want a party that's serious and won't politicize a deadly virus, you'll vote for Democrats. If you want more recklessness and irresponsibility, you'll vote Republican. Number 9, Democrats fight for common sense gun safety. They support laws to keep weapons of war out of the hands of crazy people, keep weapons of war off the streets. Republicans, on the other hand, they are owned by the National Rifle Association. They take direct orders from the NRA. Let's face it, the Second Amendment, as interpreted by Republicans, is an experiment that has failed. Consider that we are a country where gun deaths reached the highest number ever recorded in 2020, surging by 35%. We are a country that has 331 million people, yet an astounding 400 million guns in circulation. We are a nation where more Americans have died from gunshot wounds in the last 50 years than in all wars combined in American history. Let that sink in. Republicans claim to love family values, yet the rate of gun deaths of children 14 and younger rose by roughly 50% from the end of 2019 to the end of 2020, and it's only increasing today. Meanwhile, in spite of these facts, most Republicans are for eliminating virtually all gun restrictions. Governor Greg Abbott has turned Texas into the wild, wild west. Everything goes, anything goes. It's absolutely nuts in the Lone Star State, and Republicans want to turn the rest of America into what's happening in Texas. Under Republican leadership, we can expect more gun violence, including hate crimes and school shootings. Vote for Democrats if you've had enough of this dystopian nightmare and want real change to gun safety laws in America. Number 8. With Republicans in power, the issue of race is always a race to the bottom. They inflame tensions and engage in divisive culture wars. Exhibit A, Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville, who gave bigoted remarks on race and crime at a Trump rally.
They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. They are not owed that.
In a time where Americans need to come together, to heal, and to provide hope, Republicans offer nothing but hate and further harm. Their answer to racial division is nominating Herschel Walker for Senate in Georgia. Can you believe this? If you think Herschel Walker is the answer to racial tension in America, you might want to listen to Georgia pastor Jamal Bryant.
Ladies and gentlemen, when the Republican Party of Georgia moved Herschel Walker from Texas to Georgia so that he could run for Senate, it's because change was taking too fast in the post-antebellum South. The state had been flipped blue, and there are some principalities that were not prepared for a black man and a Jewish man to go to Senate at the exact same time. So they figured that they would delude us by picking somebody who they thought would in fact represent us better with a football than with a degree in philosophy. They thought we were so slow, that we were so stupid, that we would elect the lowest caricature of a stereotypical broken black man as opposed to somebody who is educated and erudite and focused. Y'all ain't ready for me today.
Sorry, Republicans. Herschel Walker is a joke, and he's a slap in the face to those who have actually fought for civil rights. If voters want America to be a nation where all people are treated equally, with dignity and respect, they will vote for Democrats. If you vote for Republicans, you're also going to get more anti-Semitism. That's a promise. There has been an explosion of hatred against Jews in the United States. Where did this begin? Where did it come from? Well, it began with Donald Trump. He courted white supremacists during his first campaign in 2015. At first, he refused to condemn former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke. He pretended he wasn't familiar with him when we all know he actually was. Then President Trump failed to strongly condemn neo-Nazis at a rally in Charlottesville.
You will not replace us!
He called those Nazis some very fine people. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has repeatedly refused to denounce or condemn Nazis. This should not be controversial. Apparently, in today's Republican Party, it is. If you want more racial tension, if you want more racial animosity, you'll vote for Republicans. If you want people working together who want to create a country that lives up to its ideals, you'll vote for Democrats. Number 7, Republicans talk a good game on immigration, but Republicans have no plan. The only thing they offer is building an expensive boondoggle of a wall. Newsflash to Republicans. Airplanes have been invented so would-be immigrants can fly over the wall. Drills, saws, and dynamite have been invented too, so immigrants can go through the wall. Let's not forget tunnels for burrowing underneath the wall. Oh, and ladders exist too, so immigrants can climb over the wall. Not to mention, if the wall is built by Donald Trump and his shoddy construction, it might just fall apart on its own. A border wall is not a plan, it's a gimmick. Democrats offer a comprehensive immigration reform plan that would fix the problem. They offer a realistic path to citizenship so people would not feel compelled to come to the United States undocumented. Don't believe the lies. Republicans do not support comprehensive immigration reform. They are too scared of their rabid anti-immigrant base to pursue real answers to this issue. So the problem keeps festering, while Republicans point fingers and instead offer nothing except pabulum and rhetoric. If you want more excuses and belly aching at the border, vote Republican. If you want viable solutions without rhetoric, vote for Democrats. Number 6, MAGA Republicans do not support LGBTQ equality. Republican states have offered a record number of anti-gay and anti-trans bills this year and last year. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis passed a noxious Don't Say Gay law that singles out and persecutes LGBTQ students. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott ordered state child welfare officials to launch child abuse investigations against parents who are offering gender-affirming care to their children. So Abbott is going after families who were following the best medical advice in the world and trying to help their children. And yet they're getting attacked by a governor for political reasons. This is dangerous and messed up. Some families with transgender children have been so scared of this persecution, of this attack in Texas, they've been forced to leave their homes and move away from the Lone Star State. In Idaho, a conservative organization is working behind the scenes on a bill to ban public drag shows. Yeah, I know that sounds, totalitarian, because it is. It's actually big government telling citizens what they can and cannot wear. It's big government going into your closet and picking out your clothes. Not to mention its hatred against the LGBTQ community, targeting a minority, singling them out for ridicule and discrimination. If you care about your LGBTQ friends and family members and coworkers and neighbors, there is no way that you can vote Republican. If you choose Democrats at the ballot box on Tuesday, they will vote to codify gay marriage so the right-wing Supreme Court cannot vote to take away this fundamental right. Number 5, Ukraine is the front line of freedom. Ukrainians have fought with valor and distinction to secure their democracy against Russia's unprovoked attack. Today, we discovered that in newly liberated villages, Ukrainian investigators have uncovered heinous and unspeakable crimes such as sexual violence and torture. This follows news about Russia bombing civilians, torturing captives, and kidnapping Ukrainian children and taking them back to Russia. Oh, by the way, that's a war crime. If the Russian barbarians win this war, the entire free world is in jeopardy. It is in grave danger. If you vote for Democrats, Ukraine will get the funding and the arms it needs to be victorious over Russia. If Republicans win, would-be House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has said he is considering canceling American funding and weapons for Ukraine. They would basically hand over Ukraine on a silver platter to Mother Russia at a time that they're winning the war. This is crazy. Republican appeasement will not bring peace. It will only embolden Vladimir Putin and encourage every brutal dictator across the globe to engage in military adventurism. A vote for Democrats is a vote to protect Ukrainian democracy and deliver a serious blow to dictators and tyrants across the globe. Number 4, climate change is the most significant challenge facing humanity. Whether we have a future as a species depends on acting quickly before it is too late. Time is of the essence. The effects of climate change are being experienced throughout the entire world. We have felt the oppressive heat waves. We have witnessed the out-of-control wildfires, such as in California. People are losing their lives in enormous storms, such as we had seen in Florida with the most recent hurricane. And they are drowning in mega floods, like we saw in Pakistan. Beloved rivers and lakes are drying up right in front of our eyes. Have you seen Salt Lake? Have you seen Lake Mead? And yet Republicans are still miraculously blind to climate change. Meanwhile, Democrats are taking immediate, swift action. Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which helped electric utilities switch to lower emission sources of energy and inspire Americans to buy electric vehicles through tax credits. The differences between the two parties on climate change could not be greater. A vote for Democrats is a vote for the future, and a vote for Republicans is a vote for failure on climate change. Number 3, the Republican Party hijacked the Supreme Court and overturned Roe v. Wade. A lot of people said, oh, this would never happen. Guess what? It happened. Overnight, millions of women in red states lost their reproductive freedom. Just like that. It was gone. It went away. If the Republicans take over Congress, they will try to pass a national law to limit or outlaw abortions. From coast to coast, women would become second-class citizens with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. The entire country would be ruled like Alabama or Mississippi. President Joe Biden has promised that if Democrats control the legislature next year, he will sign a law that codifies abortion rights. If Republicans win, women lose. Forced births will become the law of the land. If Democrats win, on the other hand, reproductive freedom will be protected and expanded from coast to coast. For reproductive freedom, the choice between Democrats and Republicans could not be clearer. Number 2, Democrats are far superior on the economy. Did you know that since 1933, the economy has grown at an annual average rate of 4.6% under Democratic presidents and only 2.4% under Republicans? So when people say I'm fiscally conservative, I am like a Republican economically, they don't know what they're talking about. Republicans are worse on the economy. Right now, life is tough for American families. I get it. It's very difficult to make ends meet. But inflation and gas prices are high worldwide, not just in America. Democrats are working on your behalf to create jobs and lower prices. They support raising the minimum wage. They support the popular child tax credit that drastically reduced child poverty. Republicans opposed it. Joe Biden has brought microchip manufacturing back to America. The president signed legislation to lower prescription drug costs for seniors. That's going to help the economy. That's going to help a lot of people with their pocketbooks. Republicans don't believe in any of that. The president brought us an infrastructure law that will put Americans back to work, building roads, tunnels, bridges, and high-speed rail. Again, Republicans were against this. It's difficult to actually know what Republicans are for. If you vote for Republicans, it will not solve your economic problems. It will make them significantly worse. Republicans have no plan whatsoever to address inflation or boost the economy. The one exception is Larry Kudlow, who was Donald Trump's top economic advisor from 2018 to 2021. Here is Kudlow's genius advice on jumpstarting America's economy.
The new British Prime Minister Liz Truss has laid out a terrific supply-side economic growth plan, which looks a lot like the basic thrust of Kevin McCarthy's Commitment to America plan.
Trump economic advisor Stephen Moore echoed Kudlow's insane advice on the economy.
Liz Truss is turning into a hero. I had some doubts about her when she was first nominated, but she has been a superstar. I mean, it's hard to find anything not to like.
So there you have it, folks. If the Republicans gain power, they plan to copy disgraced former Prime Minister Liz Truss's economic plan. It seems that Trussonomics is the Republican economic answer if you vote for them. How'd that work out in the UK? I don't know. Maybe it crashed their economy? Republicans are not focused on your pocketbook. You need to understand that. Instead of solutions, they offer sideshows and distraction. For example, aspiring House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has pledged to let Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, yeah, the crazy one, run endless investigations against Democrats. Just like they did with Benghazi and Hillary Clinton, really going after Democrats day after day if they take over. Talk about a waste of time when we need them focused on the economy. Republicans even want to impeach Joe Biden. Over what? Existing as a non-Republican? These childish political antics and frivolous circus acts might fire up the angry Republican base, and they are always angry. But how is that going to help you and your family pay their bills? By far the worst Republican idea is refusing to raise the debt ceiling. This recklessness, craziness, quite frankly, could cause a government shutdown and meltdown of epic proportions and wreck the world economy. If you think your family's budget is tight now, wait for the economic Armageddon the radical Republicans have planned over the debt ceiling. It could thrust America and the world into the next Great Depression. Why would anybody vote for a party that's promising that madness? But most important of all, Democrats will protect Medicare and Social Security. Republican Senator Rick Scott, head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, put forth a nutty plan that would, as he calls it, sunset Social Security and Medicare. I say we sunset the Republican Party instead. President Barack Obama spoke at a Wisconsin rally in support of Mandela Barnes. Barnes is running to replace Senator Ron Johnson. President Obama eloquently laid out the threat to Social Security and Medicare, and he is telling us exactly what may happen if Republicans take over Congress.
Some of you here are on Social Security. Some of your parents are on Social Security. Some of your grandparents are on Social Security. You know why they have Social Security? Because they worked for it. They worked hard jobs for it. They have chapped hands for it. They had long hours and sore backs and bad knees to get that Social Security. And if Ron Johnson does not understand that, if he understands giving tax breaks for private planes more than he understands making sure that seniors who've worked all their lives are able to retire with dignity and respect, he's not the person who's thinking about you and knows you and sees you, and he should not be your senator from Wisconsin. I mean, the message he's sending is pretty clear. If you're related to him, if you donate to his campaign, you get a deal. If you're not, you're out of luck and you're on your own.
The Republican economic plan is cosplay. Cadillac conservatives dressing up in cowboy boots and lumberjack shirts, trying to identify and pretend they're just one of the guys, one of the regular people, when in fact they're trying to screw the common man and pick their pockets. It's Democrats, not Republicans, who are on your side. It's Democrats who are fighting for you and your family. So think long and hard before turning our nation's economic future over to radical and reckless Republicans. I promise you, with Republicans in charge of our economy, it won't end well. Number one, Democrats are defending democracy, while Republicans shamelessly peddle the big lie and support autocracy. This is the number one issue, because if we lose our freedom, if we lose our democracy, we can't address any of the previous issues I've spoken about today. We will lose our rights. We won't be able to protest or speak freely without fear. Americans will become passive subjects to a king or dictator who governs by whim or mood swing. Is that the repressive political system you want your children and grandchildren to inherit? I didn't think so. This is no joke. This is a 5-alarm fire. A New York Times investigation found that 70% of Republicans running for Congress had questioned the election of President Biden, who won 7 million more votes than Donald Trump and 74 more electors. There are more than 370 election-denying Republicans that could soon be elected. Here's the scary part. Nearly 2/3 of these election deniers are favored to win their races. To address this unfolding calamity, President Joe Biden delivered a powerful and poignant speech on the critical importance of these elections to saving our democracy.
Yet now, extreme MAGA Republicans aim to question not only the legitimacy of past elections, but elections being held now and into the future. The extreme MAGA element of the Republican Party, which is a minority of that party, as I said earlier, but is its driving force, is trying to succeed where they failed in 2020, to suppress the right of voters and subvert the electoral system itself.
Biden's speech was monumentally important. It was historic. He laid out the stakes of this election. It's not about Democrats. It's not about Republicans. It is about preserving a political system where voters choose their leaders. It's a free and fair political system, apparently opposed by Fox's leading propagandist, Tucker Carlson.
Biden commanded you to accept the election results whenever they arrive, no matter what they may be.
That's exactly right, Carlson. Joe Biden did say that the candidate who gets the most votes wins the election. The result should be accepted. Whether or not you and your MAGA cronies like the outcome of the election is irrelevant. That's democracy 101. That should not be controversial. Apparently, fair and free elections are up for debate in today's twisted Republican Party. If you think I'm exaggerating, Republican Wisconsin gubernatorial nominee Tim Michels flat out said that if he wins, Wisconsin will only recognize Republican victories going forward.
Republicans will never lose another election in Wisconsin after I'm elected governor.
What Tim Michels just promised was one-party rule. That's authoritarianism, like they have in Syria, Russia, and North Korea. I don't think that's what Americans want. I don't think we want the North Korean lifestyle. But if you vote for Republicans, that's what you might get. They are flat out telling us what they want to do. It is about time that we listen. The midterms are the first national vote since the January 6th coup attempt. A vote for Republicans is a vote to reward the insurrectionists. It is a vote to endorse their violence. Because if they do not pay a price at the polls for their actions, it will send a horrible message. A message that this belligerent behavior politically that they have exhibited over and over again is acceptable. It's the new norm. Send a powerful message to say, no, this isn't the new norm, and we do not accept your violent rhetoric and behavior. A vote for Democrats is a vote for the rule of law. It is a rejection of political violence. It's a vote to preserve and protect democracy for today, tomorrow, and for the history of this country. When you go to the polls, choose wisely. We don't want this to be the last time we ever get to vote. We don't know what these Republicans have planned. Clearly, they like authoritarianism. Clearly, they have a problem with democracy. They want one-man rule. They're in love with Donald Trump. He's their orange god, their sun king. We don't know what the future holds if they win. We do know what happens if the Democrats win, and that is we continue on as a free country and as a democracy.
Breaking news into SportsCenter. The Nets have suspended Kyrie Irving for no less than 5 games. He's been at the center of a firestorm after posting a link to an anti-Semitic book and movie on social media. The team had been under fire for not taking action sooner, but they explained their process in a statement saying that they had been working with him but were disappointed in his response. Here is part of that statement. It reads, over the last several days, we have made repeated attempts to work with Kyrie Irving to help him understand the harm and danger of his words and actions, which began with him publicizing a film containing deeply disturbing anti-Semitic hate. We believe that taking the path of education in this challenging situation would be the right one, and thought that we had made progress with our joint commitment to eradicating hate and intolerance. We were dismayed today when given an opportunity in a media session that Kyrie refused to unequivocally say he has no anti-Semitic beliefs nor acknowledge specific hateful material in the film.
It's time to put the Kybosh on Kyrie. He's a gifted basketball player, but he's more toxic than talented. And that's saying a lot because he's amazing on the court. I love watching Kyrie play. He's electric, but now he's so electric he's become a third rail. Kyrie once said he believed that the earth is flat. Yeah, I'm not making that up. He's a flat earther. There's not too many people left in that club anymore, but apparently Kyrie is pretty stubborn with his conspiracy theories. Everywhere Kyrie goes, there is trouble. Irving screwed up the Brooklyn Nets' entire season last year because he refused to get a COVID vaccine and therefore could not play home games in Brooklyn. Is there anything that Kyrie reads online that he doesn't believe? Anything? Kyrie is an embarrassment and a disgrace to the NBA. He's wrecked every single team he's been on. The one year he had success was when the great LeBron James was in Cleveland to babysit him, and they won a championship. But Kyrie stabbed LeBron James in the back and jumped ship to Boston. Of course, he quickly made a mess in Boston and had to scurry away from the team to go to Brooklyn to play with Kevin Durant. And now he's created another clusterfuck in New York. You know, it's dispiriting that Kyrie is promoting the 2018 movie Hebrews to Negroes Wake Up Black America. The movie is chock full of anti-Semitic tropes, including peddling the idea of Jewish slave ships, which is up there with Marjorie Taylor Greene's idea of Jewish space lasers. The fanatical film in question propagates the hateful ideas of the Black Hebrew Israelites. This group likes to stand on street corners in major cities and shout insults. They shout insults at gay people, black people, women, Jewish people, Muslims, immigrants. Basically, they hate everybody. A very charming group they are. I used to encounter these lovely people in Philadelphia all the time because I lived only a few blocks from City Hall. I wholeheartedly agree with former basketball star and TNT commentator Charles Barkley on Kyrie Irving.
I can't believe that we ain't talking about that. We're talking about this idiot.
Barkley is correct. He's an idiot and a distraction. With Kyrie, it's always about his antics. Never about the team, never about basketball, never about the NBA. It's me with Kyrie. This isn't about rights, it's about responsibilities. I'm always in favor of people offering their unvarnished opinions. But they also must be accountable for what they say. You know, I was offended when right-wing Fox News host Laura Ingraham told basketball legend LeBron James to shut up and dribble just because he commented on politics and social issues. Athletes should be able to voice their opinions just like anyone else. So I would never tell Kyrie Irving to shut up and dribble. But perhaps the Nets would have a better record if Kyrie spent more time dribbling on the basketball court and less time having conspiracy theories dribble out of his mouth. I can't imagine Kyrie Irving is going to be in the NBA too much longer. The league cannot get rid of him quickly enough. He is toxic and nothing but trouble. I'm beginning to sound like ESPN today, but we have more NBA news. Dwayne Wade, the retired Miami Heat superstar, one of my favorite players, is defending his transgender daughter, Zaya, against his ex-wife, Siobhan Funches Wade. She filed a court petition objecting to legally changing their 15-year-old daughter Zaya's name and claiming that Wade was, quote, trying to profit off Zaya's name and gender change. Because, you know, Dwayne Wade isn't rich enough already. Here's the truth. Dwayne Wade is an amazing father. He supports his transgender daughter, and that is commendable. The basketball icon was forced to respond on social media and blasted his opportunistic ex-wife. Wade wrote, quote, while none of us are surprised by Siobhan's attempt to fight Zaya's identity and her unwavering attempt to drag my name through the mud, I'm very disappointed that she continuously finds ways of centering herself and her needs without regard to her children. This report came out while Zaya was in class. This is a kid who has maintained a 4.0 grade point average in honors classes while navigating all this unsolicited and harmful attention and debates about her gender and sexuality from those who are committed to not listening to her, much less even knowing her. I want to offer my full love and support for Dwayne Wade and Zaya. I want to also thank Dwayne Wade for being such a phenomenal father and role model. Maybe Kyrie Irving should learn something from Dwayne Wade about how to live with integrity and be a positive force in society. Elon's Twitter needs a new Musk because something doesn't smell right. The company is devolving into an unseemly moral sewer where Nazis go to network and bigots like to bloviate. Twitter is quickly moving from a social media to a social menacing site. Within hours of Musk taking over the company, Twitter was flooded with racist, sexist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic bile. Right-wing incels were so enraptured with their new freedom to spew that they had their first orgasms that didn't involve their hands. Elon must be so proud. The views on the part-time entrepreneur and full-time egotist have always been incoherent. Here's a guy with an electric car company who supports a political party, the Republicans, who don't believe in climate change or science. Go figure that one out. Elon Musk wants to relocate to Mars, but based on his early ownership of Twitter, he's already spaced out. His bizarre worldview doesn't distinguish between free speech, hate speech, and false speech. This creates dangerous conditions where haters suppress genuine free speech by harassing minorities into silence. When people are cowed into submission by bullies, it distorts and damages our democracy. On Elon's Twitter, we can expect anti-vaxxers to vie for attention with anti-Semites. This is particularly disturbing with 300 to 500 daily COVID deaths in America. The online attacks against Jews are metastasizing and migrating from cyberspace to our living space. In Charlotte, a man dressed in a Nazi uniform walked into a bar before he was run out by disgusted customers. In Los Angeles, an anti-Semitic group, the Goyim Defense League, draped a gigantic banner over a busy Los Angeles highway saying, "Kanye is right about the Jews." The Goyim Defense League repeated their despicable antics in Jacksonville, Florida. Kanye's hideous message was projected on buildings or flashed on screens throughout the city. This included TIAA Bank Field Stadium, where the universities of Georgia and Florida football teams played. While many public officials condemned the hate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis remained silent days after the anti-Semitic incidents. Charlie Crist, a Democrat who was running to replace DeSantis, slammed the governor. He said, "I am disgusted and horrified at the hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric that was displayed in Jacksonville over the weekend. Hate should have no home in Florida, period." But while anti-Semitism is spreading in our state, Governor DeSantis refuses to condemn it, even when it is broadcast on the side of a stadium he is in. This has become a disturbing pattern with DeSantis, who attacks drag queens with gusto, but miraculously loses his voice when it comes to speaking out against Nazis. In May, I observed, quote, "In January, a group of white supremacists marched into Orlando. They yelled anti-Semitic slurs and screamed, 'White power!' while waving an anti-Biden banner. DeSantis' press secretary, Christina Pushaw, responded by tweeting about the Nazi march. She said, 'Do we even know they're Nazis?' Well, yeah, maybe because they told you they were." She later had to delete this tweet after an incredible amount of criticism. Instead of making it clear that Nazis aren't welcome in Florida, DeSantis played the victim and whined. So what I'm going to say is these people, these Democrats who are trying to use this as some type of political issue to try to smear me as if I had something to do with that, we're not playing their game. Apparently, the Nazis noticed DeSantis' welcome mat and followed up their initial action by brazenly waving Hitler flags outside the entrance to Walt Disney World. This leads us back to Twitter, where Elon Musk is providing a safe space for unsavory elements to spread their messages. If you think he will moderate the haters, consider that he can't even control his own impulses and tweets defamatory trash to his 100 million plus followers. For example, he had to delete his own tweet responding to a post by Hillary Clinton. Musk tweeted that, quote, "There is a tiny possibility there might be more to the story," referring to the failed assassination attempt of Nancy Pelosi and the brutal attack on her husband, Paul Pelosi, in San Francisco. Like a typical mindless right-wing hack, Musk linked to an opinion piece in the tweet by the Santa Monica Observer. Yeah, I haven't heard of it either, but apparently it's some nutty right-wing site without a shard of credibility. But apparently it was good enough for Elon Musk. The article claimed, without providing even a shard of factual evidence, that Pelosi was drunk at the time of the assault and in a dispute with a male prostitute. The article was unsourced, and its author wrote the conspiracy theory was based on IMHO, which is internet lingo for "in my humble opinion," because, that's always a great way to source your stories, in my humble opinion. Think about that for a moment. The head of Twitter put something out there so thinly sourced, put something out there with no credibility, and did so about an assassination attempt. You would think he'd be more serious and have more integrity and more feeling. indecency to do something like that right after an attack. Since we're talking about humble opinions, here's my humble opinion about Elon Musk. Twitter will be his downfall. One can have all the money in the world, but it's useless in trying to repair a destroyed reputation. Musk is on the verge of moving from tycoon to buffoon. He has claimed that Twitter is the modern town square, but it's looking more like a clown square under his leadership. In trying to secure his company's new finances, Elon pledged to advertisers that Twitter would not become a hellscape. But as of today, it's looking more like Elon's inferno, and we're already in the fifth circle of hell and descending faster than one of his rocket ships. Joan Donovan of the Technology and Social Change Research Project said, quote, Musk owning Twitter is like putting a fox in charge of the henhouse when it comes to political misinformation. When he first bought Twitter, a celebratory Musk wrote, "The bird is freed." In little more than a week, it looks more like a sick canary in the coal mine, choking to death on the ashes of hate and intolerance. Musk's naive vision has quickly transformed Twitter into a grotesque den of ignorance and iniquity. A social media platform without serious attempts at moderation is proving itself worthy of liquidation. Elon Musk and Twitter must go. Matt Gertz is a senior fellow at Media Matters, and he wrote a really terrific article, The Right-Wing Ecosystem That Created the Paul Pelosi Conspiracy Theory. Thanks for joining our show.
Thanks so much for having me.
What are the conspiracies that the right is peddling about the attack on Paul Pelosi?
Well, there's one main conspiracy theory. They are claiming that the assailant and Paul Pelosi were actually gay lovers, and that the violent assault on Paul Pelosi was a sort of lover's spat. There's basically no evidence for this whatsoever. What they've done, as they usually do, is they've taken a small handful of facts and sort of spun them up into a wild fantasy in order to undermine, I think, the very pressing concern about violent right-wing extremism.
This took an strange turn to me. I mean, they've been rather vile with some of these right-wing media, but this was a direct attack on the Speaker of the House and her family because she wasn't there. And to see Don Jr. making jokes about this, and even the governor of Virginia, who was supposed to be a moderate, making light of this. We're going to send Pelosi back to San Francisco, he said. Is it even descending further than it has in the past? Because this even looks worse than usual. I mean, they're not even contrite about this or even pretending to be sorry about it.
Yeah, it's pretty grotesque. I mean, I think at this point, what they've all decided is that when a story like this happens, the potential damage to the Republican Party is pretty substantial because the right-wing media and Republican politicians have pushed a lot of the same conspiracy theories that this attacker was apparently obsessed with. And so rather than grapple with that in any real way, but rather than consider the possibility that what they're doing is quite dangerous, that it is leading to these sorts of violent attacks, rather than trying to cast the extremists and the conspiracy theorists out of the Republican Party, what they've decided to do is to try to turn a story about a man who committed political violence because he was obsessed with right-wing conspiracy theories into one of those right-wing conspiracy theories.
I want to debunk one of those theories that they're putting forth, and that he was left-wing. And even somebody I knew for many years commented on my Facebook and said, oh, he wasn't on the right. This was someone who was a left-wing gay person who went to a nudist colony. He wasn't right-wing at all. I mean, obviously that doesn't comport with the facts.
There's a reason we talk about it as online right-wing radicalization, though. It's because these conspiracy theories have a way of taking people from wherever they initially are in their political views to somewhere far more dark and extreme. And if you spend any time on this guy's website, as I did on Friday after his name was released, it becomes quite clear what he was interested in. The two websites that he maintained are a hodgepodge of QAnon, of Pizzagate conspiracy theories, Gamergate is in there, virulent attacks on Black people, on trans people, on Jews. I mean, it's really the latest and greatest right-wing hit list of paranoid conspiracy theories. It's not difficult to figure out where he was coming from. And, you know, when the federal government filed charges against him on Monday, a complaint said that he had told the San Francisco police that he was deliberately targeting Nancy Pelosi because she's the leader of the evil Democratic Party. They're trying very hard to create an alternative narrative because the direction that the facts point is very, very bad for them. And they've decided that this is what they want to do with it.
Right. And it's interesting. You use the word narrative. And Gateway Pundit wrote, the Pelosi narrative is being concocted in the back rooms and halls that house the powerful elites. It seems a lot of projection here. There is no narrative. There are facts. A man who was adhering to right-wing lies and was essentially radicalized went and broke in to their house looking for Nancy Pelosi. She wasn't there, and he attacked her husband. Those are the facts. It's not a narrative. The ones creating the narrative in back rooms and halls, which are, you know, their offices, and are also including powerful elites. And I mentioned a couple of them, like the governor of Virginia and the former, the son of the former president, Don Jr. I mean, it's actually what they're doing, and they're projecting that onto liberals.
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk was one of the people pushing this out. I mean, this is just really ugly stuff that's coming completely out of left field by people who really want to confuse the discussion, to toss as much dirt into the air as possible so people don't stay focused on what actually happened.
You mentioned Elon Musk, and I didn't have much regard for him to begin with, but whatever shard of respect I had for him disappeared when he quoted the Santa Monica Observer, which is a right-wing hack newspaper that once claimed that Hillary Clinton was dead when she ran for president in 2016, which of course would have made her even more impressive, had considering a dead person beat Donald Trump by 5 million votes. But as an organization that monitors the media, how alarmed are you that Elon Musk, who just bought Twitter, lacks the critical thinking skills to conduct the most basic check on sources before he tweets?
I think the people that should be worried about this are the advertisers on Twitter, who are going to have to deal with the fact that the person who they are having business relationships with is interested in creating a right-wing conspiracy theory fever swamp like this. I don't think that's going to be good for business for Elon Musk, and he needs to make a lot of money off of Twitter in order to pay back the people who helped him buy that company. So I think that he's going to have a rude awakening at some point in the near future, that either he needs to drastically change the way he's behaving on Twitter, which won't be a lot of fun for him, or he's going to be in some serious financial difficulties.
Yeah, we have seen these conspiracy theories over and over again. What is the process, how this goes from the fringes to the mainstream? You described it very well in your article, The Right-Wing Ecosystem That Created the Paul Pelosi Conspiracy Theory. Elaborate on that a little bit. How does it go from the fever swamp to Fox News?
Sure. So, I mean, the right has built this infrastructure of conspiracy theories for decades, dating back to the likes of the claims that Vince Foster, the White House aide, had been murdered by the Clintons back in the early 90s. But the internet really allowed them to be much more deliberate and precise with the way they operate. And here's how it works. There's this wide range of right-wing message boards. There are social media pundits and trolls and people who basically spend a lot of their time trying to come up with these sorts of conspiracy theories. It's a bottom-up system with a huge number of individuals spending very little time just sort of trying to turn up some stuff, some raw materials that can become a conspiracy theory. From there are hyperpartisan websites like the Santa Monica Observer that don't really have any journalistic standards, but are willing to merge together what they see on these social platforms and message boards and turn them into something that looks kind of like a news story, enough like one for someone like Elon Musk to tweet out. From there, the conversation tends to move up through the food chain from smaller right-wing sites to bigger and bigger players. The conspiracy theory might change a little bit. You'll see people who have airs of being somehow more credible adopt more of a, I'm just asking questions about some discrepancies in this story, without necessarily saying, "Oh, this is we know that Paul Pelosi and this guy were lovers." Others will go that far. People like Dinesh D'Souza don't have those sorts of airs, and they'll just say whatever the conspiracy theory is and kind of run with it. It moves up the food chain until it reaches Fox News. And they're not willing to espouse the conspiracy theory. What they're going to do, though, is give their viewers a sort of permission slip. They will tell them there are a lot of questions here. You're not crazy to think that there's something else going on. We need more information. We need more information to be released by the law enforcement or by the Pelosi people. And if we don't get it, it makes sense for us to be suspicious.
But that's another aspect of it. The people themselves, their followers, they have been so conditioned. First, they say the mainstream media is fake news and you can't trust it. You can only trust us. And then they go to a point where they condition people to look at anything that happens and say, well, okay, that's how it's reported. What's the real story? And then they say, we're doing research, and they put on their internet sleuth hats, and we're gonna break this political puzzle, this Rubik's cube. We're going to find out what the real truth is, and then they go off and look for it, and look under every rock, and keep finding really nothing, but they spin it into something. I mean, that really is the essence of QAnon, isn't it? I mean, what did Q say? And then they look for clues, and it's like a whole lifestyle that they've been conditioned to. And that, it's almost like brainwashing.
Yeah, so what you've got is a situation where the audience wants the conspiracy theories. The audience has been told that they can't trust any information from the mainstream press. So the debunkings that myself or others on the left and the center will write about these conspiracy theories will never reach them. And the people who they do trust, people like Tucker Carlson and others in the right-wing press, either are pushing the conspiracy theories directly or they are refusing to knock them down.
And we saw Alex Jones, and he was just sued, and he lost. He had to pay $1 billion to the parents of Sandy Hook because he said that their children weren't really killed; that it was all staged. And this whole Sandy Hook thing was they were crisis actors, and it was staged. He really got slammed here. Do you think that made any impact? Because it doesn't seem like it did on the right, given how they're handling the Pelosi conspiracy theories. It made no difference to them.
I think it does keep it at sort of a the level that I talked about, where they're raising questions, but they're not willing to go all the way out there. You don't see them espousing the conspiracy theory in its entirety, because that would leave them in a legally questionable place where they could end up getting sued for a lot of money. So we'll sort of see how this develops. I think it was a good sign that Alex Jones was required to pay a large sum of money. It takes a long time, though, for the wheels of justice to turn on something like that. And so, outlets like Fox News, which are currently dealing with huge lawsuits related to their 2020 election coverage, could see a similar situation unfolding in the months and years to come from those lawsuits. But I think it's too early to tell if that's going to have a real impact on the behavior that these people espouse.
They're doing a lot of propaganda on puppet masters pulling the strings behind the scenes. And of course, that comes back a lot to the Jews when they say this and their conspiracy theories with anti-Semitism. And we've seen this huge uptick in anti-Semitism I don't think I've ever seen in my lifetime. How does that play into it? And what have you seen at Media Matters in terms of more anti-Semitism on the right?
I think that it's quite a lot of the same situation. What I tend to see from people like Tucker Carlson and others at Fox News is, again, this sort of nodding and winking at the conspiracy theory. If you really, at the sort of 30,000-foot level, Tucker Carlson's show is about a cabal of global elites who have control of the U.S. media and political system and corporate entities, and are using that power to destroy Western civilization and to import lots of immigrants to change the culture. So he basically has the entire anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. He just doesn't mention the Jews specifically. What that does is it means that he can win over support from white nationalists, from neo-Nazis, which, as I've been reporting for years, he has a huge following in those circles because they know that he is bringing their talking points to a huge audience.
How have these conspiracy theories impacted the midterms?
The biggest impact I think we're going to see is that because these conspiracy theories have become so intertwined with the Republican Party, they're going to end up electing a lot of people who believe some really abhorrent things. We already have a couple of QAnon members of Congress. I think we'll have more after this cycle ends. Not necessarily because they'll, because the Republicans will be so successful altogether, just because, they'll replace other Republicans who might have been somewhat saner. I mean, the party is getting more and more extreme as time goes by, and I think headed in a really dark direction.
It's hard to believe it keeps getting worse, but every time I think it's hit the nadir, it gets worse. And some of that's social media. And Media Matters found that the Pelosi conspiracy theories were spreading on social media, including YouTube. What must social media companies do to stop spreading dangerous conspiracy theories and lies? Because they keep promising that something is going to be done, and yet they keep disseminating this information and destabilizing this country, quite frankly, because they don't have their act together.
I mean, I think they have put together standards and codes that people who post on their websites are supposed to be following, but they very rarely actually force people to follow through on that. And I mean, I think that's sending the country in a pretty dark direction. They have standards, they should stick to them.
I think one thing that surprised me a little bit, how silent some of Nancy Pelosi's colleagues were. I mean, these are her coworkers, even if they're on the Republican side. And they either were quiet about it or encouraged what happened to her family. And that is sending a very strong signal that this is acceptable. And I think a lot of people, especially those who are unstable, are going to hear that. What does it mean when the people who are supposed to be the adults in the room are encouraging these lies? I mean, this can't end well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe Biden said it quite well. You know, when one party is talking about stolen elections, about COVID being a hoax, some people who are mentally unbalanced will believe them and sort of pursue the villains that they are told are out to get them.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is Exhibit A. I mean,
Absolutely. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Carrie Lake. There's an expanding list. People who are at the least willing to push and promote these conspiracy theories, and at the most actually believe them.
Is there anything else you'd like to add on the proliferation of conspiracy theories on the right and how it's impacting our society?
Well, it's a process that was set in motion a long time ago and is moving closer and closer to some really dangerous results. We've already had the sacking of the U.S. Capitol by Trumpists who believed the conspiracy theory that the election had been stolen from him. And it doesn't seem like the Republican Party took that to heart in any real way. In fact, the conspiracy theorists have only gained more power within that party since that happened.
Well, I want to thank you for all of your hard work monitoring the right wing and their conspiracies. I think it's safe to say that you'll never be out of a job the way this is going, but your work is very much needed, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
CNN reports that lawmakers in dozens of mostly red states have passed or introduced a record number of anti-LGBTQ bills this year. The latest attack came this week in Florida, where the State Board of Education passed new discriminatory rules. Equality Florida reports that the state expanded its enforcement of its notorious Don't Say Gay law. Teachers are now threatened with being fired and even stripped of their education certificate if they have offered, quote, classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity. This is a direct assault on teachers' ability to do their jobs. It is an underhanded attempt to portray the mere existence of LGBTQ people as controversial. The goal is to scare people back into the closet and force teachers, students, and parents to whisper gay and trans as if something is bad, as if it's something to be ashamed of when it's not. What's really shameful is Governor Ron DeSantis' cowardly attack on LGBTQ youth and degradation of Florida's school system, simply to score cheap political points so he can one day become president of the United States. Make no mistake, these rules are an authoritarian gag order designed to suppress free speech that right-wing conservatives disagree with. This is classic indoctrination under the guise of education. It's what we'd expect in Putin's Russia, rather than the United States of America. I mean, is this America anymore? Think about it. Joe Saunders, the senior political director of Equality Florida, said in a press release, quote, the Board of Education's move to target individual teachers' jobs and licenses is another cruel attack from an administration that has spent months punching down at Florida's LGBTQ youth and families. Saunders pointed out that these new rules deliberately confuse people. They're ambiguous. Teachers have no idea what to do now. After all, how are teachers supposed to know what qualifies as classroom instruction? Does a teacher acknowledging that she is a lesbian or has a female partner qualify as instruction? If a student with two fathers mentions his family in class, is this instruction? Is the teacher supposed to pretend that that student's family doesn't exist and disappear their family? Again, is this America? If a trans student is being bullied, can a teacher no longer step in to keep that student safe? These are questions teachers do not know. Nobody really knows the answers to these questions. Why? Because the state wants teachers to walk on eggshells, concerned that anything they say could be construed as instruction, that their careers could be ended on a whim, just because they're accused of giving instruction on LGBTQ issues or trying to help a student who needs support. Teachers will live in a constant state of panic and err on the side of caution, even if it harms these LGBTQ students. This is wrong, it's immoral, and it's the opposite of education. Another rule passed by Florida's Board of Education targets school districts with policies that allow transgender students safe access to bathrooms and locker rooms. The new rule requires school districts to notify parents if they have a policy allowing bathroom or locker rooms to be separated on a basis other than biological sex at birth. We all know that this rule is intended to rile up right-wing parents, so they'll organize and badger school districts and teachers. The state is essentially outsourcing bullying and intimidation to so-called parents' rights organizations, which are thinly disguised conservative inquisition squads. They're often a book banning battalion across the country. When these puritanical groups talk about representing parents, they aren't talking about all parents. They really mean right-wing parents. They are often mouthpieces for anti-LGBTQ evangelical churches. And in no way do they represent all parents, and they certainly do not care about creating safe environments for all students. Given the politically motivated manipulation and coercion by Governor Ron DeSantis and his cronies in Florida, no wonder why teachers in that state are so unhappy and fleeing the state in droves. A survey by the group We the Parents found teachers leaving Florida at a higher rate than other states, with 6,000 vacancies statewide and 61% of teachers considering leaving the state. The exodus of Florida's teachers is so concerning that the state is inviting military veterans with no prior teaching experience to lead classrooms while they earn education credentials. Marlon Gregg, a teacher at Arlington Heights Elementary School in Miami, told Reuters that he had one sibling in the U.S. Army and another in the Air Force, but, quote, I would not entrust them with my children as teachers. It's just not fair for someone to come into a classroom unqualified, unprepared to teach and shape young minds. David McGrath, an English teacher in Punta Gorda on the west coast of Florida, wrote in the Fort Myers News Press, quote, DeSantis apparently thinks Florida's loss of quality teachers is a small price to pay for his national political ambitions. Bingo! McGrath nailed it. This is not about the schoolhouse. It's about Governor DeSantis pandering to his base to get to the White House. Florida is my home, and it's close to my heart. It's a shame that Governor DeSantis and Republicans are returning it to the swamp, more accurately, the right-wing fever swamps. They are thoughtlessly transforming Florida into an ugly backwater of ignorance and intolerance. They are shamelessly putting political ambition over the future of Florida's children. These students deserve better. They should be learning about reading, writing, and culture, not props in Governor DeSantis' culture war. The Sunshine State will not move forward and prosper in darkness. And a dark ages mentality is exactly what Governor DeSantis and the Republican Party have brought to Florida. Dr. Heidi Beirich is the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. It's a fantastic organization of experts who monitor and fight radical extremism. Heidi has been in the trenches for decades and is one of the world's premier experts on investigating and countering hate movements. Heidi, welcome to the Wayne Besen Show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Wayne.
Your organization said that 2022 midterms are shaping up to possibly be the most dangerous and volatile of any in recent memory. What led you to this assessment?
Well, I think the facts are already there on the ground. We've seen voters in Arizona, for example, being threatened at drop boxes by heavily armed men just in the last week. But the reason for this is that there's an injection now of white supremacist organizations, other kinds of extremist organizations, who have taken up election denialism or various ways to essentially mess with poll workers, election infrastructure, and voters in a way that was not the case before. And as extremist groups have, become almost mainstream from the right, they have, signed on with GOP factions in various states to engage in this election in a way that has just not been there before. And it's really quite scary because a lot of these groups have records of violence or connections with their propaganda to violence. And so voters are facing a landscape, and election workers are facing a landscape that is shocking and new and very unfortunate.
The far-right hate groups, particularly white supremacists, have long wanted a civil war. And they're not so fond of democracy because they don't win when people come out to vote. That seems to be at the center of their support with the Republican Party. But what concerns me is they might be the dog that catches the car, and suddenly Republicans are going to find themselves in a situation where democracy can't exist. How did this go from these fringe groups in these musty basements to the mainstream, where one of our political parties has embraced them hand in hand?
Well, you can put a lot at the feet of Trump, right, for sort of ripping down the barriers around racism and hatred of all kinds, right? We all remember when he was on stage at one of those presidential debates and said to the Proud Boys, stand by, essentially. He plays a role, but it's not just Trump. The party itself has caved on racial issues, right? Immigration has gone completely hardline. Racism towards immigrants is said so often by candidates running for office right now on the GOP ticket, it's shocking. The idea of the Great Replacement, right? This white supremacist conspiracy theory that white people are being intentionally replaced. Sometimes that's blamed on Jews, right, or global elites. That is now a campaign issue for dozens and dozens of candidates. And it's also the mantra of every white supremacist group out there, including a group like the Proud Boys. There doesn't seem to be any daylight anymore with the Republicans and this kind of extremism. And that's what's different today. You used to be able, even when the Republicans would dog whistle on race, to sort of name and shame the worst actors out of the party, right? They would turn their backs on them, not let them run for office. I always think of George Allen running for Senate in Virginia in 2006 and using a slur word for black people, and he was done. Well, that doesn't happen anymore, right? And I think we need to sort of call this for what it is, which is one of our major political parties has moved so far to the right that there is no daylight sometimes between them and other, things that we used to consider fringe extremists.
You mentioned anti-Semitism, and Kanye West has been in the news lately for trumpeting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. This encouraged a white supremacist group in Los Angeles to hang an anti-Semitic banner over a highway. And then we've had Donald Trump, who talked about Jews in Israel, trotting out old anti-Semitic tropes. It seems like anti-Semitism has really increased during this election cycle.
Yeah, I would say that that's exactly right, Wayne. We have seen anti-Semitism bubbling up in ways that we didn't used to in this kind of blatant thing. I have to say the banners in Los Angeles were, you felt like you were back in Nazi Germany or something. It was very, very creepy.
Yeah, it was it was really, as a Jewish person, it was very disconcerting. It does seem all of a sudden like these things that were taboo are out in the open again.
I have to say I've had far too many conversations in the last couple of weeks talking about the 1930s, actually, right? This feeling like there's a complacency on the right towards the rise of extremism, how dangerous it is. And that's what happened in Germany, too, in the 1930s, right? There was no one to stand up against all of this. Anyhow, the Great Replacement, I think, is part of the reason we're seeing more anti-Semitism in common discourse, because Jews are often blamed for that. But the QAnon conspiracy, which 1 in 4 Republicans apparently believes in, according to polls, is also deeply anti-Semitic.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, it's shocking.
This is actually a movement that believes that Democrats are satanic, and it's a cabal that molests children and even eats babies. The fact that many Republicans believe in this it's really mind-boggling. I never really put much stock in some of these right-wing conservatives because they've lied about a lot of issues, from gay rights to abortion. But this is a whole new level. This is just bizarro world. And that's what makes it scary. It's out of touch with reality.
Yeah, and it's a revival of the blood libel, right? This idea of eating children, sort of the oldest anti-Semitic trope that exists. It is scary. It almost seems delusional, right, that those kinds of numbers could believe that. More than 50% of Republicans believe the Great Replacement is real, which it is not. I don't really understand how we could descend so quickly into this place, but, here we are. And like I said, I blame Trump for it, but there's obviously been, a lot of white supremacy, hatred, cultural concerns bubbling out there that he was able to tap into that have now sort of organized themselves under the banner of the GOP. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is people for a long time have suffered economic distress. At first, they harmed themselves, whether it be opioids or drinking or depression, what have you. We've seen deaths of despair. And then people were looking for a narrative to explain their situation in life, their downward mobility. And then you had someone like Trump come along and Fox News, these hate entrepreneurs who profited from this and pushed this. And people said, oh, yes, they have answers. There were scapegoats. There are others who were responsible for my pain and my plight. And I think that's how we got here. And I think it's an old story. We've seen it over and over again throughout the world. Opportunists who look for scapegoats to create a narrative where people can explain why they aren't in a better place in life. And the Republican Party is running a lot on that now. And crime, for example, is one issue that they're exploiting. There's a lot of racism in that. We saw it with Senator Tuberville. And racism in this campaign, have we seen, what have you seen in terms of racism and race baiting in this election cycle?
Well, unfortunately, we're seeing every kind of bigotry and hate play a role here, right? Tuberville's comments were just blatantly racist. we're seeing attacks on Jews, attacks on the LGBTQ community with like these wild accusations around drag shows and groomers, attacks on trans kids, the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. To me, in a way, the Republican agenda is nothing like the Republican Party from years ago, where they used to talk about taxes and things like that. What they're doing is race baiting on crime, on immigration, and essentially demonizing a whole bunch of communities to rally their base. And you're right, this is an old story, right? There have been so many movements in human history that do this exact same thing to build power, including the Nazis, obviously. And it's not really, it's just an agenda of hate that we're seeing. That's what it is, to get people out to vote. And my biggest concern is you mix that in with election deniers, and if a bunch of them win in these midterm elections, then our democratic framework's going to come crashing down too. And then I don't know what you do.
And I'm concerned internationally because we have the war in Ukraine, and Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned, is the front line of fighting for freedom. But we also have winter coming up, and there's fuel shortages, and we already see far-right parties gaining strength, exploiting this. And by the way, they love Russia because it's authoritarian. So we could actually see some far-right parties in Europe gaining traction over the next few months if it's a harsh winter. We already saw in Sweden and Italy, for example, fascist parties that have risen. This must concern you as well.
It's, I think, quite terrifying, right? These are major economies, right? Sweden. Well, really, it's now Poland, Hungary, Italy, and Sweden that are run by far-right parties, some with, in Sweden's case, ties directly to Nazis. And you have the rise of far-right constellations in almost every single country in Europe, whether it's Vox in Spain or the far-right in France, the Front National and affiliated parties. And there is a possibility that Europe's future is going to be determined by these groups, people like Giorgia Meloni, and not by people who are committed to democracy. And their agenda is an anti-rights-based agenda, right? They want to have an illiberal democracy. I don't really think you can consider Hungary anymore under Orban, and the EU Parliament just voted to say this, as an actual democracy. It's not. And the tide against democratic systems is so fierce right now. It's foreboding.
Which is interesting, because in countries that actually have authoritarianism, they are now striving to be free. We look at the women in Iran fighting against the Ayatollahs and wanting to not be told what to wear. We look at the people in Russia. 300,000 just fled Russia because they didn't want to be sent to Ukraine. So these authoritarian countries aren't doing so well. China with their COVID policy. So actually in countries that do have these authoritarian governments, people are not happy. But yet in the West, there is a large number of people headed in this direction. Speaking of the Ukraine war and the battle for democracy and human rights, Russia has joined with the most odious regimes in the world. Iran, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. How would Ukraine defeating Russia impact the global fight against hate and extremism? Because Russia's been funding a lot of these neo-Nazi groups in the United States and Europe, and also trying to impact elections.
It would have a big impact, I think, both for freedom and democracy, right? To remind people what is on the line here. And it would push Russia back on its heels. And you're right. They host, for example, the head of the base, one of the most dangerous transnational neo-Nazi groups in Russia. The Russian Imperial Movement, another one, a similar kind of group, is, headquartered out of St. Petersburg. It would leave a mark, right? And it would distinguish, maybe it would even remind those people who've been voting for the far right in Europe about the value of democracy and freedom, that it's actually something that we have fought very hard for over the years to get, and he shouldn't be handing it away so easily and demonizing populations in the way that's happening with these parties.
Yeah, and Ukraine is a perfect example. They're giving their lives in blood to defend democracy and to join the West. And yet you have so many people here willing to just throw away everything that we have fought for in all of our wars. And it's very disheartening to see that. Back to the United States elections, we have these poll watchers. Some of these are a bunch of angry thugs who are going out to intimidate and harass people when they go to vote, the most basic part of democracy, voting. And people are scared. How much do these poll watchers concern you?
I think we should all be quite concerned. The Department of Justice opened basically an election integrity investigative unit a few months ago because they were already seeing these kinds of attacks. We had we shouldn't forget, in 2020, poll watchers and election workers were already facing threats coming from election deniers, Trump acolytes, and so on. That was already happening. It's just getting worse now. Voters are going to feel quite scared, I think. My organization did a poll recently and found in particular that young people, Latinos, and Black folks are afraid to vote because they're fearful of violence at the polls. And this is a vector, these poll workers, that could be a problem. But the other thing that's happening, for example, here in Georgia where I am, is these new voting laws have allowed people to just challenge voters. So people are showing up for early voting and being told some random person who you don't know and doesn't know you has challenged your right to vote. You can't cast a ballot. Here's a provisional ballot. And that's scary too. And that's going to cause voter suppression, right? Because people are going to be like, what are you talking about? They're going to walk away from the polls. If we have a bunch of people with guns outside polls, and there's only 20 states that ban weapons at the polls, shockingly, that's another thing that's going to lead to voter suppression, right? All of these dynamics.
Well, I mean, that to me is stunning, but that is stunning to me that people can bring guns to intimidate people while they try to vote. That's outrageous that that's legal in any state. It is nuts. And what's going to happen is it's going to be an arms race, because if they actually pull this off this time and they're going to have a lot of people with guns, there'll be liberals, Democrats, other people coming to the next election with guns. And it's going to look like the Hatfields and McCoys. It's going to be insane.
Yes, I think that that's very, very possible. I think in other places, you're going to have these heavily armed men, like you saw in the videos from these ballot drop boxes, standing outside the polling place, basically. And people aren't going to want to go in there and vote if they see that. And so there's going to be all these tactics create a natural voter suppression, especially for folks of color, right? That is going to trend in the way conservatives want. They don't want those people voting. And so they're going to scare the hell out of them.
Yeah, I'm hoping on some level it backfires and people say, screw this. We really do need to vote, because if we don't, we're going to give power to people like this with the guns. Big tech and social media companies have been a disaster in many ways at fighting extremism. And also in many ways, they've exacerbated it. Have they been better in this election cycle, or have they been as abysmal as usual?
They've been pretty abysmal. I will say the one thing that's different than 2020 is there are fewer big white supremacist groups and conspiracies like QAnon on the mainstream social media platforms. But that said, they have cut their election integrity teams down. I have no idea why. My organization was recently doing research on election denial organizations in the battleground states and nationally. And you look those organizations up on Facebook and Twitter, they're there. Their lies about elections aren't flagged. They're not marked in any way. So that kind of propaganda is just, free flowing. So no, they're not doing a good job. And, my God, the one thing they should at least get right is stuff around elections and voting. If somebody is going around saying the 2020 election was rigged and so will this one be, that's just a flat out lie. That shouldn't be given any kind of oxygen at all. And yet, it's all over the damn place.
Yeah, I mean, I see it over and over again. They just let that big lie pass. Or they challenge it in a very minor way, even during debates, when they should put the Kybosh on it. They should squash it and say, you know what, that's just not true. That is a lie. That's not being partisan. That is not favoring one candidate over another. That's just basic fact checking. And I see a big failure with that. Marjorie Taylor Greene is now a rising star, believe it or not, in Republican politics. And she has embraced openly the term Christian nationalist. What does this term mean? And why should people be leery of it?
It is definitely something to be leery of. It's essentially a white-based movement that believes that this country should be run on the basis of a religious principle, right? It throws separation of church and state out the door. Any kind of other religions that exist in this country wouldn't have the equal rights of Christian nationalists. It's misogynistic, anti-woman, obviously anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, rabidly. It's sort of a fantasy of returning to an all-white 1950s domestic situation that you would have seen on TV at the time, right? And it's scary because it means limiting rights of many, many people. And Marjorie, besides her QAnon interest, she's horrible. How somebody like that has not been thrown under the bus, tells you everything you need to know about the Republican Party today.
Yeah, I mean, in these born-again Christians, quite frankly, I mean, they're all, anti-gay, they're all about family values, and yet she's getting divorced now. And they don't say a damn thing about that. Isn't that interesting? I guess they missed that part of the Bible because, Jesus doesn't mention homosexuality at all, but he's quite explicit. He doesn't like divorce. But I guess they missed that part of the Bible. They always seem to cherry pick.
They sure did that with Trump, didn't they?
Yeah, they sure did. Yes, you say if I've ever seen a family man, it's that one. Although, I mean, Herschel Walker is a family man. Unfortunately, it's many families. He just hasn't told us about them. In this show, I'm discussing a plan to introduce a bill in Idaho to ban public drag shows. This seems particularly totalitarian to me, the more I think about it. I mean, the religious right wants to tell people what they can and cannot wear. That's like the Taliban. That's like Iran. I mean, think about that. You cannot wear X. We're going to choose for you what you wear. I mean, they took away the right to choose for women in terms of reproductive freedom. And now they're going so far, they're so emboldened that they think they can say, you can't wear this in public, which is really strange because, I mean, drag's been a very popular part of society, whether it's Tootsie, Milton Berle, and Bob Hope, and so on and so on. Americans have been laughing at drag shows forever, but suddenly they want to ban it. Talk about the rise of homophobia in these elections by Republicans and the use of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric in this campaign season. You touched on it earlier, but particularly going back to some of these old trips like grooming, which is basically calling gay people child molesters. It's disgusting, it's false, but they seem very emboldened more than ever to say or do anything right now. Nothing is beyond the pale. Nothing is too despicable or disgusting for them to throw out there.
I agree with you. I actually think the attacks on the LGBTQ community have been more insidious in some ways because they have leapt from just demonizing the community to actually trying to legislate away their rights. The Don't Say Gay bill in Florida is an example of this. The trying to ban drag shows. I don't even understand how that falls under, how that works with the First Amendment.
Well, because if you have Clarence Thomas mediating the First Amendment in Alito, suddenly that's how it's permissible. But I mean, go on, and under any normal time, it's clearly a violation of the First Amendment.
But you're right. That's also a creepy thought, right? When we start thinking about what's happened at the Supreme Court. And then there's the issue of just demonizing trans kids, investigating the parents of trans kids, stopping them from having access to medical treatment that is sanctioned by the American Medical Association, medical bodies. This to me is even more than just saying terrible things about immigrants. You are literally trying to directly impact the lives of these people. And I think there was a drag show canceled in Florida, maybe today, yesterday, because so many threats were coming in. And we have seen Proud Boys in front of drag shows, which is terrifying. And restrictions on education, right? What you can talk about with the LGBTQ community, books. I mean, we're getting pretty close to the old Nazi book burning with this going on with targeting the gay community.
And the brown shirts. I mean, you just referenced that. What they're doing is they put out a false theory saying that drag queens are trying to recruit somewhere, or making up drag queens are gyrating naked, and which are lies. I mean, they've even doctored videos. And they put this out online, which then inspires the Proud Boys or some other thug group to go out to harass and intimidate and literally shut down these shows. Or Pride, for that matter. We've seen them go into Pride as well. I mean, this is a whole new realm where we saw this in Russia, where they would send these paramilitary types out to beat up gay people and trans people. And now we're seeing some of this at home right now. And that's a whole new level. We saw, God hates, gay people signs before. We've seen that, always. But this is outright physical violence or the threat thereof.
It's calling out street thugs, right, to come and disrupt events. That is terrifying. And it's happening. And, Pride this year in June, there were so many threats against different parades, different events. And that's why I'm saying I think that the attacks on the LGBTQ community are at an even more, it's a direct personal level, right? It's hate crime stuff that's going on.
Yeah, but it seems very coordinated the way it's happening right now.
It is. They
use the internet to basically alert the local hate group of a local event, and then they show up there. And that is something that we associate, quite frankly, with Nazi Germany. I mean, that's what we saw with the brown shirts. And again, I wouldn't want to go that far that we're there, but we're certainly on that trajectory if this continues the way it is. Speaking of which, the Republicans could win the House and the Senate. If this happens, what will this mean in terms of hate, election denial, and outright extremism?
Well, I think a lot of Americans don't understand that we are really on the brink of losing our democratic system. If it's at the state level, if some of these election deniers get in who have said, I'm going to make sure Trump wins in 2024, or I'm going to pass a bill to, throw elections to the state Senate House, in other words, guarantee a partisan win. Well, we don't have a democracy then, right? That's the end of it. And if that happens, I'm not sure. It's almost hard to contemplate that this could happen, but it is actually on the table. Because if we lose that, right, of free and fair voting, we lose everything else. What are you going to do about civil rights? What are you going to do about human rights protections? What are you going to do about climate change? How are you going to even protest? How do you make your vote heard? None of that's going to be possible. And I really wish Americans understood what a knife's edge we're sitting on right now.
Yeah, it's frustrating that they don't.
Yeah. And if it goes the way you're talking about, Wayne, we're in serious trouble. We are going to look a lot more like Hungary in a few weeks than what we tend to think of America, democratically. And, I'm scared about this.
And I'm scared about 2024 as well, because if we get these extremists in there now, in roles like Secretary of State or governor, they have jurisdiction over elections. They can decide that the people's vote doesn't count and that right-wing legislatures are going to decide who wins. And when that occurs, what then? We have a constitutional crisis. It could really turn into violence. People are going to have to make a decision. Do I fight? Do I get in a ditch with a gun and fight? Or do I flee the country? Or do I succumb and live under a dictatorship or an authoritarian regime? And I don't think people quite get where we're headed right now. And one of the reasons for this is the bubble, the media bubble. And we saw that on Fox with Kanye West. He made some horrible anti-Semitic statements. He goes on Tucker Carlson on Fox. He says some despicable things. The American people didn't see it. It ended up on the cutting room floor. Fox went from just interviewing to being PR agents to whitewash bigotry. And there was a whistleblower. Fox would call him a mole, that released this footage. And I have a feeling that this has happened over and over again at Fox. And they try to airbrush the hatred and make some of the more extreme figures seem mainstream. What does this behavior actually say about right-wing media and their ecosystem, and how Republicans can skirt responsibility and hide behind this mask that Fox allows them to put on in other right-wing publications?
Well, a lot of us complain about social media, but pointing the finger at Fox is the correct direction. And some of the allied groups in the conservative ecosphere, I'm thinking of the Gateway Pundit and Breitbart and whatnot. They are the ones who have created the feedback loop, right, for their viewers about this. And I'm sure hate has hit the cutting room floor, but my God, the kinds of things Tucker Carlson will say, he's all about the great replacement, demonizing LGBTQ people. It is a disaster what Fox has injected into this country. People live in that bubble and they begin to normalize things that they would not have believed or said out loud at least 5 years ago, right? 6 years ago. So we should never forget the role that conservative media has played in radicalizing people. And Trump used it as his mouthpiece, right, to push these ideas out there too.
Any final thoughts as we head into the midterms?
I just really, people go out and vote for democracy. That is my grand hope, because we cannot change anything else if we don't have that system. And then I really hope that this violence doesn't occur. I hope officials are on it, right? Protect voters so that they can go cast their ballots however they want to vote.
I would ask conservatives, I would ask those who back these election denying candidates, do you want to tell your children and grandchildren about how we used to vote in America? How there was once a time where we chose our leaders and they didn't choose us. And that is what is at stake. And these people mindlessly backing these MAGA candidates don't seem to get that. They're living in what they perceive as now, and they are jeopardizing the future of their own children and grandchildren. Thank you so much for appearing on the Wayne Besen Show. It's great to have you as always, and you offer so much insight into extremism. How do people find your organization? Where can they reach out and to learn about it?
Yeah, so our website's globalextremism.org. We're on Twitter at Global Extremism. You can find all of our work there. And thank you so much, Wayne, for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Apparently, misogyny is alive and well at the Fox. You would think the right-wing network that had brought us the sexual harassment scandals of Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes would have learned its lesson by now. But like its viewers, it appears that its employees have a steep learning curve. Fox News hosts Jessica Tarlov and Greg Gutfeld got into a scrum over the conspiracy theories propagated by Elon Musk on Twitter. Here's a clip of the brouhaha.
Chief troll point here. So when Elon Musk weighed in on the conspiracy theories about DePap, whoever, the guy who broke into Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi's house, had zip ties with him, beat him in the head with a hammer, right? And Elon Musk replied, I believe, to a Hillary Clinton tweet about this, promoting complete lies about what had happened.
So did Hillary. That was the joke. That was his joke. He was trolling her. He was trolling her because she came out with her own conspiracy that this is obviously right-wing, a right-wing
well, the guy,
conspiracy.
Excuse me. The guy said, and the DOJ report came out today, right, that he wanted to come there to capture Nancy Pelosi, to make her repent for all of the lies of the Democratic Party, and he was going to beat her kneecaps in until she did so that she would have to be wheeled into Congress.
Yes.
To show what happened. So Elon Musk is the CEO of that company. Hillary Clinton, you could say whatever you want about her.
He was responding to Hillary Clinton. He was trolling her.
He was spreading lies.
Actually,
so was she.
The DOJ indictment of this man. The DOJ indictment actually says that he also just wanted to tie her up to go to
Everybody
sleep.
takes things down.
So there
See, look at you. You are getting too emotional about this. You should be enjoying
just because I'm at
the
a higher
speech.
pitch than you doesn't mean I'm not more emotional. It's just estrogen.
Jesse,
enjoy it.
Too emotional, huh? You can see it right there, the disturbing Fox News culture of misogyny that has plagued that company from the very beginning. Clearly, nothing has changed at Fox. If Greg Gutfeld talks to a woman like that on the air, a colleague, imagine what he says when the cameras are off and he's alone.